I just picked up a burrito for Mr. Kruse, a salad bowl for Mrs. Kruse, and a bowl for myself. I'm about to go over to their place and interview them for the Educator Chipotle Challenge after we share this meal together. Hey everyone, Kayla Ebby here with the Educator Chipotle Challenge, and I have Mr. Dale Kruse, my first and sixth grade teacher at Bayport, which then became Anderson Elementary School. Mr. Kruse, thank you so much for being a part of this Educator Chipotle Challenge and allowing me to interview you. Why don't you tell us what your career as an educator was like?
Oh, okay. I taught in Stillwater District for 31 years. I had 37 years in the school district. I started off as a bus driver and then as a bus driver and custodian, and then a full-time custodian while I was going to school. And I started in 1970 at Lily Lake Elementary School in Stillwater. Taught there 5 years, and then I had a chance to teach for the Department of Defense in Germany for 2 years, from 75 to 77. And when I came back to Stillwater, I was at Washington Elementary School till 83. And then I retired in 01. The last 18 years, I was down in Bayport Anderson Elementary School, where I had the honor of having Kayla as a student. I taught every grade in school, from kindergarten through sixth grade, except second. I never had an opportunity to teach second grade, but I was hired as a sixth grade teacher to teach in Germany, and the second year I had an opportunity to teach kindergarten over there.
And what or who inspired you to become a teacher?
My fifth grade teacher, Mrs. Courier, who really, I guess, got me interested in reading and more interested in school. She was just a very caring person. As I mentioned earlier when we were talking, that I think she's the first one that really showed that she cared about students more. Mm-hmm. And that just made me a better student. And then the other teacher that really did that same thing, the caring and sharing, was Mr. Frank Ryan, my seventh grade history teacher. Really a neat guy. And I think the main thing is that they came across to all their students that they really cared about them, that they were there to help them, not just to present a lesson and, if you get it, fine. If you don't, fine. They're willing to really help you out and see that you were successful.
Yeah, and I can attest to how important that relationship building is, because you and Mrs. Kruse, as I mentioned earlier, I may not remember the exact units or lessons and specific history that I learned from you both, but I am an educator today in part because you and Mrs. Kruse cared so much about us, and that was evident in the parent-teacher conferences that we had, and the effort that you both put into your lessons, and you came to school with just positive, optimistic attitudes, and that care was definitely evident.
Yeah, and that really makes myself and my wife, I know, really feel good. I think that's a neat thing about education, when you have had students, former students, come, and it was so neat to see you yesterday for the first time in 12 years.
Right, exactly.
And have an opportunity to do this, so looking forward to it.
Yeah, and part of why I appreciate being an educator is to make that difference and to help young people in any way that is possible. So, can you tell us what were some of the most rewarding parts about being a teacher?
Well, I think, it's kind of an old cliche, but some of the first things I think they remember is when I first started, you're doing a lesson and wondering, are you getting through to the children or not?
Mm-hmm.
And at that old cliche that, you can see when the light bulb turns and like, I get it. And I think that was a neat feeling all the time. For most of the years, the kids really, I enjoyed being in the classroom and that give and take, I guess, with the students, and maybe that's one reason I like the 5th and 6th grade more. I did like to kid a little bit in the classroom, but
just a little bit.
Yeah, just a little. But I think it was a matter of, letting the kids see that you're just a person too.
Mm-hmm.
It was always interesting if you saw a student in the grocery store and you'd see him say something, that's Mr. Kruse. He eats too.
Right.
Seeing students years later and to know that they remember you, kind of a neat situation.
Over the course of the 31 years that you were in education, what challenges did you face and how did you handle them?
Some of the curriculum changes that our district came up with later years, it was more to satisfy state requirements, and I don't think they were always were definitely not my first choice. But when you're a small cog in a big wheel, you don't have too much to say about it. But I guess you had to adapt. I liked that when you could teach, I guess don't try to teach somebody else's style. Feel when you're doing something, working with it, do what's comfortable for you.
Mm-hmm.
And again, the main thing is let the kids know that you care.
To the attitudes of the parents and the students. So when you talk about some of the challenges that you faced, you mentioned the parent involvement and the communication. What else was challenging about that?
Well, it just seemed like I guess in later years, where I'm not sure when I started, but I think my wife had mentioned we went with I'd gone to a conference and picked up a booklet that another district had used, and I just used part of it where I started having conferences at the beginning of the school year. And I think that really helped. So many times, even if you've been in a school a long time, you may know a lot of the parents, but there's always some you haven't had or haven't had previous children or whatever. And we would send letters out once I got the class list and a couple pages typed that the parents could fill out, like goals for their kids that they could put out what they see as important. Excuse me. And then also I wanted the children to fill out some goals for them. And then also at the same time, it gave me a chance to say, well, this is kind of the way how I run my classroom. This is what I expected. I always kind of emphasize, they always used to say the 3 R's. Well, I always had the 4th one added, and that was the responsibility part of it. So you had the reading, writing, arithmetic, and responsibility. And I pushed that on. I thought, just let the parents know that that's important, because a lot of years when I was either in 5th or 6th grade, it was either their last year in elementary school, and they weren't going to have a teacher in the classroom reminding them each day that, you got an assignment due tomorrow. If I did have an issue with a student as the year went on, it really helped when I would say, well, if you remember beginning of the year when we had the pre-conferences, this is kind of how I said things would go and what I expect. And so that usually settled that issue pretty fast because they'd say yes, but like I say, basically, I think parents want their children to do well, and when they don't do as well as what they expect, they usually like somebody to blame, and it's usually anybody or anything but themselves. But
can you share a story or multiple stories, because I know you're quite the storyteller, of meaningful interactions that you've had with former students over the years?
I remember one of the things we did at when I was at Washington Elementary. It was a 2-story older building like Bayport Elementary School. And one year we decided to do this egg drop, and out the back door where the fire escape was on, we were on the top floor, and the kids had to come up with an idea of how they could drop a raw egg from the second floor down to the ground without it breaking. Interesting to see the ingenious way that things, what they came up with. And there again, also, it also gave the parents a big chance to be involved with their kids, because they could do this at home, come up with their contraption. And so I thought that was really a neat thing. And also with, I'm a Minnesota Viking fan. Sometimes I wonder why. But anyway, when at Bayport, the Vikings came out one year with a program where they would highlight a football player on a Viking player, and use it as a geography lesson. And so there were a lot of questions about either the state he was from, where he played college, hometown, and it taught a lot of geography, but around the U.S. And I always had that as a homework thing. It was a couple pages that I just made copies of, and the kids could take home. So those kinds of things where you got, I think, a neat reaction with the kids and the parents were kind of highlights of the years. And then, of course, always through the years, if you'd see a former student come back and just even have them recognize you and come up to you with a smile on their face, as Jackie mentioned, they come up and give her a big hug, and they'd give me a hug, but they're glad to see you, and I guess that makes you feel pretty special. That you figure, well, you must have done some things right, because they at least like you yet.
Right. Yeah, and before, when we were eating Chipotle earlier, you had mentioned a phone call recently, or in the last couple of years, from a former student. Can you speak to that briefly?
Yes. Student, I think it was the first year we were back, probably about 3 years ago. And anyway, there was a message on the phone when we got home that he'd wondered if this was a Dale Kruse that had taught in Bayport Elementary and was a former student, and was wondering if I could give him a call, because he was really interested in trying to get together. So I called him back. We talked for quite a while, and it just was really neat. It was a situation where his dad had passed away a year or two before, but his whole statement was that he was in counseling or something. Now I can't remember if it was in the school or in a counseling situation as a profession. Yeah. And I believe it was that. But he said, that I'd made a big difference believing in him at the time, and he was having a rough time in school, and I think I was 5th grade when I had him. And I guess, sometimes in a small school, reputation precedes the student sometime. And from teacher talking in the lounge, and I never really like to listen to that too much, because I like to make my own assessment.
Yep.
But he just, thanked me over and over, and he said, it's part of why he went into the counseling and trying to help others the way I had helped him. And I thought, boy, that makes you feel pretty darn good.
To know after so many years, I mean, like
Yeah.
you had mentioned, we hadn't seen each other in 12 years since my graduation party, and it may not feel like this with every student, but boy, the ones that it does, and you have that interaction, and you hear that question that you've asked yourself so many times in your career: did I make a difference? Did I?
You wonder how much of an influence you had, and for a former student like that to take the time and pick up the phone, I'm sure I hadn't seen him for at least a dozen years since I'd had him in school, and longer than that, because I've been retired longer than that.
True.
So it just it makes you feel awfully good.
What words of wisdom? You had already mentioned like the relationship building and the importance of the communication home. What else would you impart on aspiring educators?
Don't try to fool the students. If you don't know something, admit it. In this day and age, I mean, with the telephones and computers, you can find anything out very quickly. To be honest with them, and show that you care, and just try to relate without sounding like you're on a soapbox about how important some form of education is. College isn't for everyone. You see the trades, but some kind of learning beyond your high school career. Be open, be honest, know your material, be prepared, I think, as well as you can be. And like I say, if you don't know something, don't be afraid to admit that you aren't, and let's look it up and find out what's going on.
Right. All right. Before we sign off, is there anything else that you would like to share?
It is a hard, very difficult job, I thought, but I loved it for 31 years, and enjoy it. And when you're practice teaching, really, get into it and get involved, because teaching definitely is not for everyone. And if you don't really, I think, really don't believe in what you're doing, then I'd suggest you not go into it.
Sure.
But if you do, we need good teachers. I know there's a lot of other better paying jobs out there, but we need good teachers too.
Yeah, I've heard and I've seen things written about how teachers make all other professions possible.
Yeah, well, yeah, that's right. You're absolutely right. It's I don't know. Yes, I agree.
Yeah, I have greatly appreciated your time and your stories, and like we've talked about throughout this interview, I really appreciated being one of your students, and I will reiterate this as many times as I have the opportunity to, that you really made a difference in my life, and you continue to make a difference in my career as a school counselor, and I hope to have just a sliver of the impact on young people as you have on myself and my classmates over 31 years. That's a lot of time to dedicate yourself to the profession, and I appreciate it.
Well, that makes all 31 years feel well worth it. Thank you very much, Kayla.
You're welcome.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.